welcome to the King of Games 98. On this episode, we have Baldur's Gate versus Tekken 3.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another Battle of 1998 episode. We're taking it back to the 90s, the times where boy bands were all the rage and Alanis Morissette was the coolest thing around. So today we're bringing you another battle where we face two games against each other where they battle to the death. And so today we have two games that are well renowned and that have very loyal fan bases. One of them is Baldur's Gate. That was Bioware's original breakthrough hit. And the other one is the mighty Tekken 3. But, you know, one is not a party, so I needed some other people in here in order to discuss this with me. And so I have Anthony Arriaga with me, aka Polybits. What's up, Anthony?
Briax! What's up, people? 98. This is good. I feel 21 all over again.
Dude, you actually remember 98 because I remember 98, but I was, I don't know, 9?
Oh, nah, man.
You were like an old man already by then.
Yo,
you were like trying to swing girls and stuff.
Yo, I was working. I was like trading games in like an adult.
Yeah. No, I wasn't able to do that because I was in Cuba and we didn't have shit.
Good times.
And the other person, because we need 3 in order to break any deadlock, because otherwise we will never be able to get past the arguments. It's Jazzy Geoff himself, the guy from the Netherlands that is actually from the UK. Jeff, how are you?
Good day, gentlemen.
Why don't we get started, guys? Are we ready?
Yeah,
let's hit it.
All set.
So I'm a little bit scared about these games because I know Tekken 3 very well.
Right.
But I think we can all relate to the fact that Baldur's Gate is kind of, you know, a game that eluded us for whatever reason. All of us, I think, are mostly console gamers. Is that right?
No, that's pretty accurate. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and so if you weren't really in the PC scene at the time in 98, 99, then Baldur's Gate is not a game that you necessarily have a lot of experience with. I particularly, you know, had read a lot about it, and I was always in awe at how reviewers talked about it, that this was a game with so much option and that you could really roleplay as you wanted, but it just always eluded me, and so I never really got to play it when it originally released. But what about you, Anthony? What is your experience with Baldur's Gate?
I mean, I'm the same. Like, I wasn't a PC gamer. I'm still really not a PC gamer, you know? But my experience was, it was like I have friends that played it, and because the thing is, like, you know, everyone always heard about Dungeons and Dragons, you know, that was the you know, Dungeons and Dragons you always heard of, and I knew people that used to play that hardcore, you know what I'm saying, like the board game.
Yeah.
To a scary degree. I had never seen anything like this. So anytime I always heard about Dungeons and Dragons, I was kind of a little like worried about the people I was around, you know? But I was so like not being hardcore, number one, into RPGs, you know, like I was very particular about what RPGs I would play. Baldur's Gate kind of intrigued me because I always liked that isometric view, you know?
You did?
Yeah, I always did. Yeah, that was like kind of like the appeal to me. You know, like same thing with like Diablo and stuff, you know? Like those views always, I don't know, that's what I prefer if I'm looking at an RPG sometimes, you know, action RPG.
Okay.
So with that being said though, I have to say that my experience with Baldur's Gate is actually very recent. Because my son downloaded it recently. He actually went and downloaded this game because he's a huge Bioware fan.
What is wrong with that kid?
Well, I'm assuming pre-Andromeda, right? he's still holding on to hope. And he downloaded the game and he actually loves it. He loves it, and it was funny because of things that I had to piece this together because of what I remember reading about the game, seeing the game. And watching him play it and just kind of messing around with him a little bit, I was able to piece together a lot of different ideas and details that I saw from the game. And the one thing in general, like, just because, this is kind of like the first thing we're speaking of right now, but like the one thing I could say is that it looks like it took the complexity of Dungeons and Dragons, but almost simplified it in a way so that a casual gamer could get into it without having any previous knowledge of Dungeons and Dragons. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it put the Dungeons and Dragons rule set, the second edition, and it adapted it into a game so that all of that was running in the background. It gave you an interface to run, Dungeons and Dragons, and that, I think, was one of the biggest breakthroughs that it did, because I think games before this, they had really tried to implement Dungeons and Dragons, but they were not really that straightforward. It kind of really required a master's in order to really get into it. And so I think Baldur's Gate and Bioware, they were able to distill the Dungeons and Dragons campaign experience into something that was straightforward and that felt intuitive. So I think you're right with respect to that. But Geoff, what's your personal experience with this game, if any?
Yeah, it's very little, but it's one of those games that you've always heard of. Even if you were only into console gaming back in the 90s, it was still a name and a title that you would hear around your friends in the playground or at school or whatever. I remember a mate of mine has always gone on about this game and the influence that it had on their interest and their passion towards like Western RPGs, and people who knew about Bioware. Bioware was a developer or publisher for me that I hadn't really come across for a long time, up until maybe the mid-noughties. So it's definitely a game that, as I say, I was aware of, but when people would explain it to me, I'm like, well, that doesn't sound like FIFA, that doesn't sound like Final Fantasy even, so it's like, well, I'm never going to have
Why should I play this?
Yeah, and to be honest with you, like, we had a PC at home, it was a functional PC, it wasn't for gaming. So whenever I would try and do any kind of games on it, it would have to be like Space Pinball or Solitaire or whatever. So I never really had the kit at home to be able to play this, so it always passed me by.
Yeah, and the PC console divide was very marked back then. I mean, even nowadays it's marked, but back then in the 90s, to play a PC game was an entirely different experience than playing a console game.
Yeah.
And it was a very niche experience because not everyone was able, as you say, to build a PC that could run these games. But I do remember when I would see Baldur's Gate, it's a game that looks very pretty in pictures. And I think a lot of the Infinity Engine games, they have that maybe in motion they don't look that impressive, but because they have this pre-rendered backgrounds, they just look very clean and very painterly, and artistic in pictures. And so that's really what called out to me originally when I saw Baldur's Gate. It's just, it looked so nice, and so on and so forth, like the Icewind Dale games and Baldur's Gate 2, etc. Because Baldur's Gate 2 was when I actually heard about Baldur's Gate, because this came out in 98. I wasn't here in the United States at that point. But I would never have had the PC to run it. So even if I wanted to, I don't think I really could have done it. But just to give you a little bit more background, like, Anthony said, it was developed by Bioware. Bioware had done other games before this, but this was really the game that put them on the map. It was really not expected that it would do so well. It actually, Interplay, who was the publisher, really didn't expect it to sell very well. And Bioware had already done this other game called Shatter Steel, which was kind of like a mech warrior-like game, where you control the mech. And just for a little bit of background, Bioware was founded by Ray Muzica and Greg Seshuk, who were doctors. And they decided to just go into the game development. And so they founded Bioware in 95, and that's all she wrote with respect to that. But Baldur's Gate itself is an isometric RPG, meaning that there is kind of an overhead but slightly askew perspective to the action. You don't really see the sky or anything, which I think is really what bugs me about isometric RPGs, Anthony. I don't like the fact that I can't see the sky. That there's something claustrophobic about that really does not call out to me.
That's such an interesting point that never occurred to me.
I'm that serious. I mean, that's a big point for me. but it was released in December 21 of 1998, so this one just barely scraped by on the 98 line, but it did. It was released in Christmas time of 98, and as Anthony mentioned, it used the Dungeons and Dragons license, but particularly the Forgotten Realms setting, which was really the most popular campaign setting at the time. There were a lot of novels at the time done by R.A. Salvatore, and this was really, the most popular D&D campaign setting at the time. But it also had the Infinity engine, which is an engine that Bioware developed in-house, particularly for these types of games, that was very compatible with the D&D rule set. So, man, we're getting really nerdy up in here.
Yeah, this got real.
Yeah, so that's Baldur's Gate. But let's switch over now to Tekken 3. And Tekken 3, in complete contrast to Baldur's Gate, is, I think, a game that we all have some sort of personal experience with. What do you say, Geoff?
Yeah, this game, this is probably my favourite 3D fighting game on the PlayStation. That whole summer when we spoke in a previous time about Resident Evil 2, that game and Tekken 3 were hand in hand, like the two games swapping discs in my PlayStation. It's absolutely seminal for me for that year, so you can tell what way I'm heading in this conversation. But it really was like,
I'll do my best to sway you the other way.
I've got an open mind. But it was the game that myself and a lot of my mates who all had PlayStations, this was the one game that we all had. So it was a real kind of coming together, bringing together of people kind of game where in my hometown.
Yeah, it's really hard to put yourself back in the time period, and remember how much of a phenomenon this game was. I mean, the first game I played in the Tekken series was Tekken 2, and it was not too long before I actually saw Tekken 3, and Tekken 2 was great. Still, I think to this day, one of the best intro, movies of all time, in my personal humble opinion. But when I went to a friend's house, and this friend I used to trade games with in Cuba, of course, you don't get games right at the same time, but this was around 1999, so this was just about the time period where I was about to live. And I went into his house, and I saw like 8 people huddled around the screen, and they were all playing Tekken 3. And the thing that stuck out to me the most when I saw it was the sheer roster of characters. Because Tekken 2 has a lot of characters, but Tekken 3, boy, they just went crazy with characters. And it's not that it looked so much better than Tekken 2, but, the aesthetic design just looked a lot cooler. Like, Huarang looked cool, Jin Kazama looked great, he was shirtless and stuff. There's something about the game that made it feel like, oh man, this is really exciting. And it was just a great party game. Even though it was only 2 players, you constantly switch controllers, etc., in order to, pick the winner. So, Anthony, what was your experience with it? Because you were a little bit older by then, but I imagine that it was no less important.
Right. No, it was, because I think this was 90. Yeah, right. Obviously, this was 98. So this is
Anthony. We're talking about 96.
Well, let's roll it back to 96. I just like that year, but no, no, because this is year 3 of the PlayStation. So when you saw Tekken, you could tell that they were still pushing this thing. They were still pushing the limits of the PlayStation, and Tekken 3 just looked. I mean, I played Tekken 1, I played Tekken 2. But Tekken 3, like, what did the roster alone was like 15 new characters, I think. It was about 15 new characters. The graphics were just stunning. The full motion video was like, the intro and stuff was just amazing. And how they were able to make the home port actually better than the arcade version. With the extra modes. What did you have? They have the force mode, ball mode.
Extra characters, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was just sick, man. It was the game for everyone. Like, no matter, even if you weren't a fighting game fan, you could just play the extra modes.
And you could just bottom mash through it if you didn't really know how to play, and that still felt cool.
Right. That's what I think. Because I always felt this is my personal opinion, but I always felt like Namco always built on something Sega did previous,
Yeah.
So this was, to me, like, this was their anti-virtual fighter thing, but they did it right. I mean, they just the move list, the like you said, the button mashing, to me, like in a lot of 3D fighters, that's the best part, because anyone can jump in. Anyone can just jump in and start button mashing.
And the thing is that Tekken 3 also had a cheating mode, which was called Eddie Gordo.
Yeah.
So if you were not good at all, then just pick Eddie.
Right.
And there you go. You're going to hold your own with Eddie Gordo. And it ruptured many friendships back in the day. And it created many arguments because that asshole picked Eddie Gordo, and now he's destroying everyone, even though he has no skills.
It was funny though, because I remember, like, one of the things that you would always read about, and like in the previews and stuff, was always like how realistic all the hair looked in the game.
Can you imagine that, man?
That was a big selling point. Like, the hair looks amazing in this game.
But I will give that. I mean, for a game of its time, I remember that hair back in the PlayStation 1 era was just a block.
Right.
So you have this block, and that's supposed to represent hair. With Tekken, the hair kind of flowed. I mean, it wasn't realistic or anything, but the hair kind of had independent movement of the body, which is impressive for the time. So, and I think I'm going to just piggyback off of what you said, Anthony, that Sega just kind of piggybacks off of what Namco piggybacks off what Sega is doing. So, you have something like Ridge Racer, which is essentially, kind of virtual racing or something like that, or Daytona influenced. And then you have something like Tekken, which is basically a copycat of Virtua Fighter.
Right.
But they end up always kind of feeling like their own thing. And I feel like with Tekken and Tekken 2, the distinction wasn't so pronounced. But with Tekken 3, that's when I feel like they really stepped away from Virtua Fighter and really became its own thing. Would you agree, Geoff?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's a really good point. I never thought about the whole Sega Namco, but I guess they were both two massive arcade players at the time, right?
You never thought about it, but they certainly did.
Yeah. I really do think, because I also like Tekken 2. I remember I annihilated the demo I had. I didn't have the full game, but I played the demo like crazy. And Tekken 3 was that moment where it really felt like this was something that Namco had really refined. I think that there were big leaps from Tekken 2. I think there was like a couple of year gap in the development cycle, so they didn't just churn it out immediately. And they definitely did enough, and you guys have mentioned the modes already. They've done enough that have enabled people to realize, I think, this is something really unique.
It really started doing its own thing. And for reference, 98 was also the year that Virtua Fighter 3 Team Battle came out. And Virtua Fighter 3 Team Battle is not in this competition.
No.
So that should tell you how Tekken, at this point in time, really took off and went much further than Virtua Fighter even though Virtua Fighter was the original kind of game, and it's a very deep game. But with Tekken 3, Namco really just put everything together, particularly, in bringing it to the home, to the console, because on the arcade, it lacked a lot of the features that people love about the console release. So it's one of those rare instances where the console release is much better than the arcade. Similar to what happened with Soul Edge or Soul Blade, depending upon which region you're in. But it's just the sheer amount of content that they added. I mean, think about it. They only had, 6 main returning characters from Tekken 2 that were playable from the outset. Actually, they were unlockable, some of them. And they had like over a dozen new characters, including Hwoarang, including Eddie, including Jin, who Jin is pretty much Kazuya, but, his son. But they also had like Panda, they had Ogre, which is the boss.
Right.
They had Gon, which was a very tiny dinosaur that farted.
Yep.
It's just, the game has so much character in it, and one of the most awesome and exciting things about playing Tekken 3, really, for me at least, was kind of going through the arcade mode and seeing the FMV, ending
the endings,
scenes.
Yeah.
Because there were always some kind of non sequitur that made it feel like the characters actually had a lot of character. So, for example, Forrest Law, who's the son of Martial Law, like, if you play through his campaign, I mean, I think at the end he's practicing with Paul. And they're like jumping and stuff like that in the dojo, and then Paul is like, I'm gonna do that, and then Paul like tries to do it and he just slams on his face. It's just things like that where you see like, oh, Paul and Marshall are actually really good friends with each other, and they're like constantly one-upping, and Paul is kind of the gung-ho, macho, I got this shit, type of character. So it gave a different angle to the characters, and for the time at least, they were really well made CG cutscenes. Namco was great at making CG cutscenes.
They were phenomenal at that. Yeah.
Do you agree, Anthony?
No, for sure, man. The production value on this, the other thing too, like just in terms of like the storyline for the game, I just love the fact that they took a chance and made it 20 years later, right? Like this that took place 20 years later, which was really cool because then like. It was a good way for them to filter out some of the characters that maybe weren't that good or that popular, and just add so many more. And that's that's what I really appreciate about Namco though, like the quality that they put in, and at the time, it was hard to tell the home version from the arcade version if you were watching them, but that's how good the ports were, that Namco was putting out there. And they put a lot of effort and a lot of love into this thing, and that was something that was. This was probably maybe this is around the first time that we actually saw something like this, like an arcade port that was better. On the home console.
I mean, Soul Edge and Soul Blade did a lot of it as well because they added kind of a storyline, etc.
But this was an existing franchise. You know what I'm saying? Like this was like the third game in the series, so people knew this was coming. This is a big deal.
Yeah. But let's jump back into Baldur's Gate because I feel like we really gush about Tekken 3 because we have such personal connections to it. But Baldur's Gate, I mean, it really did a lot. I think one of the biggest things is that it gave freedom to the player, and it was very influenced by Interplay's Wasteland. Who, if we're really getting down to it, Wasteland is one of the most influential games of all time. Wasteland has basically disperse its DNA across so many different genres, so many different games. But Baldur's Gate kind of took that and just really presented a very nice package around it. I don't know much about the Forgotten Realms scenario. I know that it takes place on a continent called Faerun. I'm not going to get too in-depth into stories or anything like that, but you could basically pick your race, class, alignment, and like any typical RPG, you would slowly go up in your strength and your attributes, etc. And you control a party, and as you go through this world, encountering people, doing a lot of reading. I think that's a big part of Baldur's Gate. It's just you're gonna have to do a lot of reading,
right?
And I think that's part of the D&D experience. So for the people that were into this, I don't think that was an issue. But for the general player, seeing that you basically have to read several books worth of writing, that may not have been very appealing. Do you think so, Anthony?
I mean, it like I said, like the game had like this depth to it, but like it introduced like these really cool features, man. Like one of the things I noticed about the game, which was really cool, me and my son were talking about it, was that when somebody in your party dies, right? You can revive them, but you have to go to like a temple and have a priest revive them, so they're not lost forever during the game. Stuff like that to me is like that is so cool. Like it's so cool. Yeah. It's not like just an instant automatic revival. Yeah. It's like you got to go to a temple. Like that's that Dungeons and Dragons right there. That whole aspect of it. But like I said, it's that Dungeons and Dragon depth, but they make it kind of cool. Like they make it simpler. They simplified it in that way. And I think that's a huge reason why this game is that's why people are still talking about it. That's why people are still playing it.
Is it that it allowed people like single players to play a Dungeon Dragons type game rather than you needing 4 or 5 people or whatever. Is it like the fact that you can do it on your own? Is that kind of the appeal to it?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, D&D, I don't know. I figure you guys have never played D&D. I haven't either. But I've always been interested in it. But just to set up a D&D campaign, it takes dedication. It's kind of like a hobby project.
Yeah.
Right.
And, it takes a lot of imagination. You have to have your dungeon master and just kind of, create a narrative around your exploits. And, this presented that experience in a very digestible and single-player format. And I think you have to give it a lot of credit for that. But the other thing is just the importance of dialogue in the game.
Right.
I think this is really where the game has been so influential because, the dialogue tree, it stems from this game. Whenever you see a dialogue tree in any games nowadays, you can thank Baldur's Gate because it really popularized it. There were dialogue trees before, of course. I mean, dialogue trees have been a part of gaming since adventure games have been a thing, but Baldur's Gate really established the Bioware model whereby your dialogue affected who you are, how people perceive you, and that it has a permanent effect on the game itself.
Yeah.
So that's really where Baldur's Gate really stood out from its peers. Because you play something like Final Fantasy, it's called a role-playing game, but you're role-playing as a particular character that's predetermined, and it's a predetermined story. With something like Baldur's Gate, you basically have carte blanche to be the character that you want to be.
Right.
And I think that's really what made it the BioWare experience, that you had choice, that you had the decisions, to make that would shape the world in which you played.
Yeah.
So I think that's very important. Do you think so, Geoff?
Oh yeah. Well, it's this stuff is seminal. I've got a bit of a personal issue with dialogue choices in games nowadays, actually, because I feel like in the original state they were really clear on what you needed to choose and the path it would take you down. I think we've got to a point, and I remember Mass Effect 2 really being on this, of you have these 3 options and you feel like, okay, option 1 is I don't agree, we need to move on with the mission. And you go, okay, I feel like that's a good option. I select that option, and it's like, no, screw you, buddy. We need to get on with this, and I don't like your attitude. It's like, what? No, that's not what.
Like, there's no nuance whatsoever.
Yeah. So definitely, like, we see it today, and it's prevalent in a lot of games. I just think some games don't quite know how to use it, and the older games, the ones that I have played, obviously not this one, always you feel like exactly what you're choosing is having a real impact. And a lot of developers now are saying, you choose the story, you make the decisions, and yada yada yada. But I'm not quite sure that games are doing that these days. But back then that was an incredible thing to do, to be able to like affect your path.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I think it's that point of like, this is real role playing. Again, not that Final Fantasy isn't role playing, but it's role playing in the sense that you can improve your character stats, etc., but you're not really implanting your character into the avatar that you're playing as. And this is something that PC games always did a lot better. With games like Ultima, they were really at the forefront of trying to give you a really wide open swath of options. So I think you really need to commend that game for establishing that and making it popular. And so, Anthony, what did your son think about Baldur's Gate kind of coming into it many years later? Because Baldur's Gate did receive an enhanced remake, and I imagine that's where he played it, right? He played it on iOS or PC or something, or some of the newer PCs.
Yeah, he played it on PC. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, like, what he really, I mean, what I loved about it, well, I'll tell you, it's funny because he actually wrote down a few points that he wanted me to bring up, right? So I think this is very interesting. Coming from a 16-year-old that just started playing this game, right? So one of the things he loved was that the immersive features, such as your companions needing to rest and time passing by while traveling from location to location, right? He found that very, like, a cool feature. And think about that. This is a 98 though, you know, when you think about it when it happened. One of the things that he mentioned though, and this is one of the things I noticed when he was playing that was, and this is so Bioware though, it's that the quests where sometimes they were untracked. So it made you feel better when you would like figure something out by yourself. Like, and one of the examples that he brought up was like tracking a broken down carriage and finding bandits, you know? But on the flip side, untracked stuff, and this is like BioWare, right? Untracked quests could all be frustrating because if you didn't know where to go, there's no journal giving you specific information, you know? So
when you say untracked, you mean like non-linear?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that he brought up. But at the same time, he not even him being a Dungeons and Dragons fan, he just thought he knew that it's a very hardcore Dungeons and Dragons feature set, and at least for an average player, it would just be a little too hardcore. But it can take a lot of, you can take a lot of time to get back into it, especially for someone who's never played a game like that before. And so my son, he plays his RPGs. He's played Diablo, and this is a kid like this is how crazy this game is. Not 21 years old. He was born a few years after this game even came out, and he's still playing this game to this day. I think that says a lot about like the
lasting value of the game itself.
Yeah, I think to me that was the most impressive thing. Like, yeah, this kid, he's in high school, he's doing things with his life, but seeing him play Baldur's Gate just brought a tear to my eye, you know? It's like, this is my son. I've raised him right.
Yeah. A heartwarming moment of the podcast.
But I think, like, thinking out loud, like, that's where, when we're looking at these two games versus each other, Tekken 3, or the merits of these games, Tekken 3 is definitely a real nostalgia trip.
Right.
And it's like, okay, I recognize that this was a fantastic game now, but really, like, there are now lots of better fighters out there if you really want to play a great fighter. Baldur's Gate and the people that revere that game, I guess, you always want to kind of avoid the opinions on the extreme scales. Baldur's Gate still draws in new players. And
it's a very unique experience.
Yeah.
I mean, with Tekken 3... you can play other fighting games, including in the Tekken series, that basically do it better than Tekken 3. If you play Tekken 3, it's because of nostalgia, mostly.
Yeah.
But Baldur's Gate, there's only one way to play Baldur's Gate. There are other games that have improved upon it, but to play that campaign, to play that story, to play that particular feel of game, you have to play either Baldur's Gate or its sequel.
Yeah.
And one of the things about the sequel is that it's one of the few instances where the sequel picks up right after the end of the first game. So really, this game should be seen as, two halves of a whole. But yeah, I mean, the fact that there's no other experience like this, there are similar experiences, but nothing quite like it, should give a lot of points to Baldur's Gate. So I guess now that we have talked about that, why don't we talk about the reception? And this is where we start seeing a little bit of discrepancy, because needless to say, Tekken 3 is a juggernaut. It's an absolute juggernaut. I mean, it sold 8.3 million copies on the PlayStation. That makes it the fourth best-selling game in the PlayStation.
Wow.
It's an absolute juggernaut.
Yeah.
The game sold like hotcakes.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, if you go out into a retro meetup or something like that, you're probably going to find Tekken 3, because everybody and their mother had Tekken 3.
Yeah.
It was huge in Europe. Europe loved Tekken 3. And huge in Latin America as well. So it really spread its tentacles into a lot of markets, that are really hard to break. So Tekken did absolutely fantastic, in terms of sales. And in reviews, it holds a Metacritic of 96, which is the second highest Metacritic on PlayStation. Like, I don't usually care about Metacritic, but even if you don't care about Metacritic, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, 96.
It just shows that people were really big on this game. I mean, that's kind of Ocarina of Time hyperbole we're talking about here. So it received 3 10s from EGM and a 9 from one EGM reviewer, but basically this was seen kind of as a perfect game. And I think it was because it added so much to the base game that was released in arcade that people were just so in love with, and it was so addicting to play this game with your friends.
Yeah.
And on the Japanese end, Famitsu gave it a 9.5. It won Fighting Game of the Year from EGM and Game Informer. And Next Generation magazine said, Tekken 3 isn't quite the artful masterpiece that Virtua Fighter 3 is. I think that statement hasn't stood the test of time. But it's still awesome in its own right and has moved the series even further from its Me Too roots. The fighting system has evolved nicely, resulting in some wild and effective moves and new characters, a faster responsiveness, and an impressive 3D fighting experience. So yeah, Tekken 3 was very well received. Do you think so, Geoff?
Yeah, that sounds really fair. It was really fluid. The polygons really ramped up a notch from Tekken 2. Music was brilliant. The new characters, like you said it in the past, a load of new characters, which was quite brave, but most of them were very interesting to play. Eddie was a bit cheap, but Huarang was brilliant. Yeah, I think that's, at the time, you couldn't get much better than that on the consoles.
Let me ask you, who was your main, Geoff?
Huarang, easily.
Me too. Easily as well.
Yeah.
How about you, Anthony? He's going to say Eddie.
You know what? I will say
you,
Eddie.
Anthony?
I don't care. I'm not mad about that.
Not mad about that? You're going to be the villain?
just to cause some friction here.
Yeah. But let's switch over to Baldur's Gate. The impressive thing about Baldur's Gate is that there were no expectations whatsoever on it. You know, Interplay, who was funding the game and publishing the game at the time, they did not expect anything out of this game. They were just like, all right, guys, just make the game and just release it. And, you know, we'll cross our fingers and hope, you know, we make back our development costs. 0 sales were expected in Britain. Geoff, think about that.
Really?
0 sales. Like, there must be some dude, you know, that's really into D&D that would have bought this. But
That's
some guy at
crazy.
Interplay said, no, we're not going to sell a single copy in the United Kingdom,
But
in Britain.
that's
I don't know
that's
how you
bizarre,
reached that
is.
conclusion, but that's insane.
Is this how Brexit started?
Maybe.
The sentiments
Perhaps.
towards Interplay. Yeah.
The seeds were planted in '98.
But like
Perhaps.
even Fallout was popular, you know, and yeah, that's an amazing forecast. Or someone just didn't submit
It's an
it on time.
incredibly
Yeah.
stupid forecast. But lo and behold, it sold like hotcakes as well. I mean, it sold a lot for a PC game. It was on the top 10 PC games chart for like streaking on weeks into 1999 because it was released at the tail end of 98. So it was selling well into 1999. And by 2002, it had surpassed 2.2 million sales. Now, look, it's not 8.3 million copies like Tekken 3 sold. But 2.2 million sales for a niche RPG on PCs based on Dungeons and Dragons
With a
That's
0
huge.
forecast?
Yeah, man.
with a 0 forecast in Britain, boy, that's some impressive shit. I gotta tip my hat to Baldur's Gate. They really were the underdog, and they really, you know, seized the moment there. What do you think, Anthony?
No, I think that's amazing. I mean, it's so funny. I can't believe the forecast of 0, but you know, I mean, like obviously like the PC install base was never going to be as much as like the console gaming, you know?
Yeah.
So,
And if you think back on the time, like even just 1 million copies, you would be certified gold.
no, back then for sure.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
500,000. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
500,000 got you like 3 sequels.
Yeah,
back in the day.
right? Yeah. So 2.2 million for a PC game, like you said, Ozzy, just a niche RPG game. That's incredible, man. That's really impressive.
And it made Bioware into millionaires. It made
I
Bioware
think-
really establish themselves.
Yeah, I think when you look at it from that point of view, like this is the game that really established Bioware. You know, that's even crazier out the gate.
Yeah.
That this is what happened. This is when it started, and it's cool that you could see like their whole their mechanics starting off in this game and branching out into later games like Mass Effect and whatnot. You know?
Yeah.
Well, and going on the review front, it holds a Metacritic of 91. Again, caveat emptor, Metacritic is not the end all be all. But let's unpack that number a little bit. You know, this was 1998. Everyone wanted the best looking, amazing polygonal graphics. And here comes this game that's basically 2D, because really Baldur's Gate is 2D.
Yeah.
And it has this Byzantine complex rules. I don't think there's any way that Baldur's Gate was gonna get higher than this, because reviewers were probably not expecting this. They were probably not used to this. This is not what people were looking for. This is not what the market was necessarily looking for at the time. So I could see reviewers just saying, yeah, this is really cool, but it's not Tekken 3. So I think that might have had something to do with it. And there's also another element that I think PC gamers and PC magazines tended to be a lot more mature and tended to be run by actual adults that were back in the day in the 80s.
Yeah.
And so I happen to think that PC reviewers were less susceptible to hype, whereas on consoles, you had GamePro basically, you get a 10, you get a 5, you get a 5. Everyone got a 5. And they were basically being run by their ad department because they needed to sell magazines. Maybe this is me being naive, or maybe this is me just trying to reach. But I'm thinking that maybe PC gamers had a little bit more of an objective perspective on Baldur's Gate. Do you agree with that statement at all, Geoff, or am I just speaking out of my ass here?
No. It's a really good point. I think that PC gaming when I think about how I would absorb information back in the late 90s, and it was magazines. And if I try and picture myself back in we call them newsagents over in the UK, but basically you've got like all the soccer mags, then you've got all the gaming mags, and all the gaming mags are for consoles. And they're all bright, character filled. They're really they're trying to grab kids between the age of 8 and 12. Like here's some free cards, here's some free stuff, da-da-da-da-da. PC gamer mags were like that next layer up. They looked mature, they were thick, they had a hard spine. They usually came with a free demo disc, but the demo disc had Adobe something and it had other software. You're like, what is this? What's going on here? It was really like, this is quite sophisticated and quite mature. So I definitely think there's a lot of weight in what you're saying in terms of the kind of the mature levels of what the writers are aiming for. So the writers themselves, or the critics, the reviewers, could have been the same people, but they're aiming for the different markets. And I definitely think that
I don't think they were the same people, most likely. But I could see your point.
A job's a job, right? No matter if you're writing for Home County Life magazine, writing about horses or whatever, a job's a job. No, but it's really
Teas and Crumpets magazine.
Exactly. No, but it's a really bit of random info. But there's a show called Black Mirror with Charlie Brooker. He's like the creator.
Yeah.
Charlie Brooker was a PC gamer reviewer back in the 90s.
Oh, that's a fun factoid. I didn't realize that.
And it's like, when you think someone who can write really satirical and really quite like forward-thinking ideas on what tech can do with our lives, he was a PC gamer reviewer. Actually, you think, well, that kind of adds up.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. Well, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and we'll take a look at the legacy of these games, the impact on the genre that they were respectively in, and then just kind of come up with a head-to-head and come up with a winner. So we'll be back in a moment. Alright guys, and we're back, and let's take a look now at what the lasting legacy of these games has been, and really what the impact they have made on their particular respective genres. I know in the past we've talked about impact and legacy as separate criteria, but I think it makes more sense to just blend them. And so let's start with Tekken 3. I think Tekken, as we had discussed, it's the moment that really established Tekken as a mainstay franchise and really overtook Virtua Fighter as the de facto leader of 3D arena fighting games. So we're not talking Street Fighter here, just 3D fighting games. And I think there's also something to be said with Tekken that it made it was the point in which the console became a really good contender, compared to the arcade counterparts. And so I think it really was maybe not a significant blow, but just a blow all the same to the lifespan of the arcade. Because if you could get the same experience at home as you did in the arcade, then that means that you don't have to go to the arcade in the first instance. And I think that is huge. And the fact that there were additional features, such as Tekken Force in Tekken 3, just made it, complete sense to play it on the console instead of the arcade. Do you agree, Geoff?
Yeah, we're really approaching that time now where the arcade in the UK, I remember, really starting to struggle. You would still go there for like the light gun games, but you're now approaching the time where spending £30 on a game actually felt quite cheap in comparison to dumping pound after dollar into these arcade machines only to get your asses kicked. And I think Tekken 3 was that perfect blend of, as you said earlier, like you can button bash your way through it on the really simple, easy settings. But if you really wanted a challenge, you could really ramp it up and you feel like you're actually getting better and better rather than just feeling like it's just easy because it's a home console version. So definitely those lines are starting to blur.
Yeah, because even back in the day, let's go back to the 90s, you look at a 2D fighting game like Street Fighter Alpha 3, the console version was still compromised.
Massively.
And yeah. And so when you look at Tekken 3, it really was an improvement upon the arcade version. So again, I think that's the moment where players kind of in their mindset, I don't need to leave the home. Do you agree, Anthony?
Yeah, it just proves my point that Namco's evil and killed the arcade scene. But
I never heard this point from you, Anthony. Where did this point come from?
I just, it's my Sega fanboyism just coming in. I think though that I think you guys kind of made all the points though. It was the first time that the line was just completely blurred at that point. And you weren't going to go to the arcade anymore because this is what we were always waiting for. Even from the 16-bit generation, we were always waiting for that perfect arcade port, Yeah,
and so we went from that moment where your console version of Virtua Fighter 2 on the Genesis was complete crap to, okay, this is really good.
Right.
I can play this now. But in terms of the legacy, though, where do you think Tekken 3 ranks nowadays? Did it really leave a lasting impact on the genre itself?
No. Nah. I think because like we said, we've mentioned there's been better fighters since. I don't think anyone, if you're making a list of like fighters, not that Tekken 3 is a terrible game. No, obviously not. But I don't think it's at the top of your list anymore. I think you can.
It's for me.
I don't know. No. I'm just I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate, like in a way, like because you have. There's been, okay, here's the thing. There's been so many more Tekken games since that it's possible that people have just forgotten about Tekken 3, Maybe people...
I disagree. I think that Namco, ever since Tekken 3, they've been trying to chase Tekken 3. They've been trying to get back to what made Tekken 3 so good.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that deserves props because Tekken 3 is still held as the pinnacle of the series, I think. Do you agree, Geoff?
Yeah, well, I stopped playing Tekken around, I think, number 5 was the last one I played. Tekken 3 really felt like, for that generation, especially for the console itself, like a real pinnacle title. I'm just thinking if it's something that has had a lasting legacy, I think that it definitely contributed towards the continued rise in popularity of having consoles as the main go-to for your 3D fighters. When you think of like when they started to excel, especially with the Dead or Alive franchise in the next generation, when I think like 3D fighters really started to ramp up the quality. Obviously Soul Calibur as well. I think Tekken 3 played a massive part in confirming to Namco that there was a lot of value and merit in ensuring their home console ports were absolutely top notch.
Yeah, and Tekken 3 was kind of another brick in the wall, but really Soul Calibur was the moment where, okay, we went from the arcade is fine to, okay, I'd rather just play this on the Dreamcast.
Yeah.
So I think Tekken 3 was one step in that direction.
Yeah.
But I think it also had another part of the lasting legacy, which is that it almost made it necessary for fighting games to include a lot of additional features. And nowadays, when you see a game like Street Fighter V that releases without a story mode, you take issue with it. And so I think, something like Tekken Force, which was essentially a beat 'em up game, within the game, it's something that you never saw back then. So I think it really upped the ante on the level of content that needed to be offered by a fighting game. Do you agree, Geoff?
Yeah, I would say Namco, if you look back at it now, they're kind of even shooting themselves in the foot at this moment in time. They're giving you more. They're asking you to pump less money into their arcades. And it's actually kind of causing the death of one large revenue stream for the company's income. But I definitely think that there's an element of, as I say, shooting themselves in the foot. And you see the consequence today where we get a fighter with absolutely no additional content. Whereas you look at Tekken 3, there was like 12 unlockable characters, 2 additional non kind of fighting modes, that Tekken Force and Tekken Ball. It's incredible the amount of work they put in for probably the even though they sold 8 million copies, for probably the minimal income that came back. And I think companies like Capcom now, or even Bandai Namco, are saying, okay, we need to do bare bones here and try and recoup money elsewhere because we need to make this viable.
Yeah, and that's how we eventually end up with like downloadable characters, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, Tekken 3 just gave everything to you right away. You had to unlock it, but it was there. It was within the disc. And nowadays, companies are just trying to recoup their costs through kind of nickel and diming you with various features or various characters. And I think Tekken 3 deserves merit because it did that, and that's no longer kind of the case. I mean, you still expect it, but companies get away with a lot more than they could have gotten away back in the day. But let's shift over to Baldur's Gate, though, because I really do think that this game had a massive legacy. And I think almost every game nowadays can probably trace their lineage down to Bioware's Baldur's Gate, because we now see RPG mechanics in almost every game. We see dialogue trees on a lot of games. I think really that Bioware, because they were able to establish themselves with Baldur's Gate and they set up the rules of what a Bioware game would be, they really spread their seeds, afterwards. And so Baldur's Gate is really kind of the inception point of what games are like nowadays, and the idea of expecting more, in your choice, in your play styles, but also doing it with elegance, because it's great and all to have a lot of option, but a gamer will not be as receptive to it if it doesn't look good. Baldur's Gate, gave you choice, but with a very elegant package. And I think, that really has left a huge impact on the gaming scene. And it was after this that we had Baldur's Gate 2, then we had Neverwinter Nights, and then eventually we had Knights of the Old Republic, which is when Bioware went from, a really revered developer of a niche, genre to, okay, these guys are AAA tier, quality. What do you think, Anthony?
No, I agree. I think this... See, like, when we're talking about lasting legacy, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Tekken 3 sucks. I just mean that, like, between this and Baldur's Gate, I maybe I interpret it differently, but I just mean, like, which game would you be able to play now? And I feel that Baldur's Gate, they just set up so much. You just see, it's great to watch the history of BioWare and just watch how this game started it all, and to see what they would go on to do after this and make this such a it made this game more attainable to just a casual RPG guy, and just to see how the things they put in this game, the seeds they planted in this game, what you would later see in games like Knights of the Old Republic, when they really made their name for themselves, you know.
Yeah.
So I think to me, when I look at Baldur's Gate, I just see the way BioWare just kind of started building their reputation here, and it's pretty cool to watch. It's sad now, but pretty cool to watch then.
Yeah, no, I mean, but there's also the element of this isometric RPGs. We can't discount the fact that they died for a long time. They're kind of seen as outdated, and it was only until Obsidian, who, by the way, were very closely connected with BioWare through Black Isle. You know, Obsidian is basically the former developers of Black Isle who did, you know, develop part of Baldur's Gate. They brought back the isometric RPG with Pillars of Eternity, and then Tyranny, and then Wasteland 2 came out, etc. And that's when we started seeing isometric RPGs again. But for a long time, isometric RPGs were not were not being released. Everyone went 3D. And so you also can't discount the fact that, you know, the particular style of game that Baldur's Gate provides, it's not very popular anymore, even with something like Pillars of Eternity releasing. You know, so yes, its DNA is still there in a lot of different games, but its particular type of playstyle, it's not that popular anymore. What do you think, Geoff?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that the DNA striking through modern day RPGs, BioWare can claim a lot of responsibility for. And that's the thing that I'm weighing up in my mind now. I'm really on the fence, really on that fence of like lasting legacy, because Tekken 3 was a fighter, and fighters have been done before. It wasn't like it wasn't revolutionizing anything. It was just smoother, easier to play, far more accessible, had all the things were just looked a bit better. But Baldur's Gate, from what I've seen since we had this matchup, and I've done my just watching people do long plays and just hearing from people who really love the game, it's really hard to discount how Baldur's Gate has fundamentally enabled your classic board game or your classic gaming in Dungeons and Dragons, and really kept that spirit alive of roleplay and of really being able to enter a fantasy world. And I think that's an incredibly interesting legacy that this game can claim.
Yeah, and we can also thank this game for other games that would eventually follow, even Fallout 3.
Yeah.
You know, even Fallout New Vegas, and this particular type of game where it's, you know, choice focused. I think we have to thank Baldur's Gate for that, because Fallout had already come out by then, you know, when this game came out, but it was a different experience. It was more action focused. You know, this game really brought a different type of play style, which gave you the options of going in different ways, and, you know, probably had something to do, for example, in other games, you know, in completely different genres like Deus Ex. I mean, Deus Ex was very influenced by System Shock and other Ultima Underworld, etc. But Baldur's Gate, the fact that they were doing this, I can imagine that it probably gave some more confidence to the people at, let's say, you know, that were developing Deus Ex, you know, to say, okay, you know, gamers are okay with something like this, where it's kind of open-ended.
Yeah.
And, you know, there were other fantastic games like Planescape Torment that would follow, you know, that were built on the foundation that BioWare laid down. So I really think that its legacy cannot be understated. And I guess let's come down to the last criteria. I mean, on a head-to-head match, you know, which game would you rather play, and which do you think is the more important game? So I'm going to start with you, Ant.
Oh, man. Damn.
Yes!
Okay, so if I have to look at it from back in '98, you got to go with Tekken 3, right? The popularity, just the buzz. It was like the 3D version of a Street Fighter game being released. You know, it was a big deal. Lasting impression, legacy. I got to go with Baldur's Gate, only because I think, of the two games, it's the game that you would still play now, and even on iOS, You know, just still playing that game on iOS. People are still doing that. So with that being said, head to head, man, I'm gonna go Baldur's Gate.
All right. All right. What about you, Geoff?
Yeah, that's exactly the same thought process that I'm going through. If I'm going to put myself back in 1998, I knew exactly what I was doing, but I was a 14-year-old with only one console, right? So what choice do you have? I think that when we're looking at the whole tournament, that we're looking at like what are the best games that came out in 1998, I have to go with my final decision being Tekken 3.
Okay. All right. Good. So we have, so that's the final decision, even head to head, but this is the final decision. You're picking Tekken 3.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess that comes down to me, and unlike Arnie, I'll make my decision pretty
Shade casted.
Look, Tekken 3 is a phenomenal game. I still think that it holds up to this day. If you ask me which game would I rather play now in this moment, I would say Tekken 3. I would prefer to play that game. But if we're talking which one is the most important game and which, when compared side to side, is the game that would take the edge, it has to be Baldur's Gate. Baldur's Gate is a game that still to this day offers so much depth and that has been so influential that I think ultimately at the end of the day, it's one of the giants of the field. So Tekken 3 it's a great game, but it's a game of its time. It's a game that has a lot of nostalgia tied to it. And it's a game that nowadays you can pretty much get the same experience playing other games. And I think that makes a very big distinction when you're putting these two against each other. And let's just say Baldur's Gate was a game that back in the day was hard to access. Nowadays it's a game that's very easy to access because you can play it on iOS, you can play it on your iPad. And in fact, the developers of the Enhanced Edition said that it makes perfect sense to play it on an iPad because you have the touchscreen. And so it's almost as if Baldur's Gate was released 10 years too early. And so I think out of the two games, yes, Tekken 3 is still the more accessible game, but Baldur's Gate still holds its weight. And I think in terms of its legacy, it's just a giant of the field. So, yeah, I will go Baldur's Gate. I think that Baldur's Gate, I just said out.
What?
So yeah, sorry, Tekken. This was unexpected.
Right? No, it's funny. I thought...
It's funny because we were talking about this on the thread before we joined, and we've been talking about this because we were supposed to record this episode sometime back, and I was just kidding as in saying that Baldur's Gate doesn't have a chance. Tekken 3, we all love Tekken 3. Why would we ever pick anything other than Tekken 3? And so Paul was going to be on this episode, and Paul was hey guys, I'm going to go to bat for Baldur's Gate. Because someone needs to counteract Ozzy. But here you go. Ethics and journalism. I can be very objective. And in that objectivity, I think that I need to admit that Baldur's Gate is the more influential game, and it's the one that really takes the nod over Tekken 3. And so this was completely unexpected.
Yeah,
they almost didn't want me to host this episode. They said this guy's going to be a hack. But no, I do have integrity, hopefully.
No, I think you've been really fair, to be honest with you. Yeah, I kind of had it in my head beforehand. This is going to be a bit of a landslide. But yeah, I'm like hearing both of you. It's like, look, I never played it, but I can fully appreciate like the impact that this game has had. So yeah, I'm all for it. Moving on to the next round, all for it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, this is, I think, the first upset.
This is
of this matchup.
This is craziness.
This is a huge upset.
It's funny because I thought you guys were going to vote opposite. As we've been doing this episode, I came in not knowing what I was going to vote for, and it's funny because the more we talked about it, the more I was just kind of like, yeah, actually, I'm going to go this way.
Well, I'm glad that we made our decision, that we were happy with it, and I am glad that at the end of the day, we didn't come in with a bias or preconceived notions. We were biased, we were nostalgic, but we were able to put aside that bias and say, okay, which one makes the most sense for us? Yeah. Even though Geoff voted Tekken 3, it's still a valid choice.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that someone picked Tekken 3. I wouldn't have wanted it to be a no-hitter. But that's all she wrote. Tekken 3.
You're out.
Sad to see you
Bye,
go.
bye, Felicia. Bye.
You gave us you gave us Ling Xiaoyu's ending. Jeff, take it away with Ling Xiaoyu's ending. What's so special about Ling Xiaoyu's ending?
It's probably the most. It's the cutest, most thought-provoking ending to any single fighter in a video game. Not only does she get her theme park, and let's be honest, we'd all want a theme park, she also gets to enjoy it with her pet panda.
Of course.
And she also gets to punch Heihachi, actually kick Heihachi in the face.
Oh yeah, yeah. So she gets a revenge, and revenge, that's what Tekken's all about, so it's perfect.
Yep. Everyone wants revenge in Tekken. Yep. So see ya, Tekken. Baldur's Gate, you have it cut out for you. You have your work cut out for you, because next round is not going to be that easy.
But this is 20 years in the making, though. They deserve this moment.
We will see. It's 21 years after the chickens are coming home to roost. All right, see ya, guys. This has been a fun episode. As always, please make sure to subscribe to our podcast if you like what you hear. But more importantly, if you do like what you hear, and even if you don't like what you hear, just leave us a review. But if you don't like what you hear, kind of be nice about it. Just let us know what we need to fix, and just don't tell people never listen to this, guys, because they don't know their shit. I hope we know our shit.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely leave us a review. That's the best way to get us more exposure. And secondly, we have a website. On this website, we're always providing, new content. We're providing companion articles, particularly now as we're doing this whole Battle of 1998. We're gonna have a lot of thoughts, and so to really get the full picture about these games, you really need to visit the website. And so if you like the written form, this is just another option to get your Region Free Gamers intake. So you can find us on Instagram at Region Free Gamers Podcast, and you can also find us on Twitter at Region Free Gamer. And Anthony, he's Polybits_. Jeff, he's G-Spot Gaming. You can find him there. And me, I'm at Shadow of the Collector with periods in between those words. And so, anything else you guys want to say?
Nah, we're good.
We're all good.
All right, guys.
Baldur's
Until next time.
Gate.
See ya.
Later.
See ya.
Bye.